Howdy my totally as always Tubular gamers, we're back with you guessed it, another video. Thanks for coming back to the channel. So for today's video I got an interesting topic. You ever play a game that's just way harder than you expected it to be? It might even be surprisingly difficult. That's today's subject.
You probably know exactly what I'm talking about, where you play a game and you don't expect it to be much of a challenge. Maybe you expect it to be a little challenging, but then it ends up being just way harder than you thought it would ever be. Well, today I'm going to be talking about 15 games where that was the case for me, where I didn't think these games were going to be all that difficult. Maybe a little challenging, but they ended up being quite difficult. In fact, surprisingly so even. Now, this list is in no particular order, and as always, difficulty is subjective. What I find incredibly difficult, you might not find difficult at all. So let me know how you're feeling about these games down below.
Hey, I just want to give a special personal thank you to everybody that even made it to this part of the video. I really do appreciate it. Y'all are awesome. Please like, share, comment, subscribe.
Now, when I started making this list, the very first game I thought of was Toy Story for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, and I think this is a perfect first game to talk about. Now, we all know Toy Story, one of the most recognizable kids movies of all time, and naturally there was a few kids video games, emphasis on kids video games. I mean, you'd expect the kids movie to have a pretty kid-friendly video game. Well, I played this game as a kid, and it was damn near impossible for me as a child. Like, as a wee lad, this game was next to impossible for me. I have no idea how I beat it. But the crazy thing is that I came back to this game as an adult thinking, oh, it's probably not that hard. No, this game is actually pretty hard. Like, this is one of the most challenging games I have ever played. I would never have expected to say that the Toy Story video game on Super Nintendo is one of the hardest games ever made, but here we are. It absolutely is one of those games that is surprisingly difficult. A video game based off a children's movie should not be anywhere near this difficult. It should be digestible, bite-sized, and incredibly accessible. This game is none of those things. It's for the most part a 2D platformer that is honestly just brutally difficult, with some levels having just a ton of thorns in them, more so than the roses outside. Like, some of these levels I spent hours as a kid, and then I spent over an hour as an adult, and I'm just sitting here like, what the hell? Why is this game so difficult? The game starts out simple enough with Woody's Roundup, but once you get to the first boss, the game really shows its true colors, that it is not messing around. This is an annoying, difficult boss fight, and things really only do get worse from here. There are several platforming levels that are just stupidly difficult, where you have to make incredibly precise jumps. The hit detection is just all kinds of broken. You'll get hit by stuff you're not even near. The levels feel like they can take an eternity, and then swinging with Woody's string is damn near impossible. It is terrible in this game, and when you get to the end of the game, Sid's workbench, they make you use the swinging way too much. This sucks. Really, all of the levels that have anything to do with Sid are just way too difficult. Whether it's his workbench, his house, anything to do with that stupid kid is just very difficult. Not every level is brutally difficult, but a lot of them will take you many tries. Now, I do want to give a quick shout out to the Lion King game. I've heard from many people it's also very difficult. I myself have not played it. I don't plan on playing it, man. Toy Story was difficult enough for me. And to this day, I'm still just kind of shocked with how difficult this game still is in the modern day. It truly is a surprisingly difficult game. Now, while thinking of games for this list, another game that popped up pretty quick was Jak 2. Now, I love the Jak and Daxter series. I really love all of Naughty Dog's games, and Jak 2 really is one of their best. It's also like their most difficult game. Yes, of course, if you play The Last of Us on like crushing, it's going to be harder, but just for a normal playthrough, yeah, Jak 2 is their hardest game, and I still find it surprising just how challenging this game got at times. Like Toy Story, it doesn't start super hard, they really just ramp things up, but it's also pretty inconsistent with its difficulty. There are some missions towards the beginning of the game that are just way harder than even some of the later missions, and so the balancing can be a little off. As a teenager, this game had me ripping my hair out. There was a few missions that I retried over and over. And this game still has some missions where I think about them to this day and it sends a little shiver up my spine. I'm like, oh, I hated that mission. Really, there's one in particular that does it to me every time. You probably already know what I'm going to talk about if you've played the game. The mission on the dock. where you get just absolutely ass blasted and swarmed by guards for minutes on end and you have to escape the dock. I hated this mission. I was on this mission for days because you literally can't do anything else once you start this mission. You have to complete this. And while that's the hardest mission of the game in my opinion, it's not the only challenging one. The mission where you have to throw the bombs is pretty annoying. I was on that for a good while. The boss fights are kind of difficult. And that stupid mission where you go down into the sewers with the useless ass AI, that was a tricky one. Now, while I would say Jak 2's more infamous missions are more well known these days, it's still pretty surprising how difficult Jak 2 gets. I mean, the first Jak and Daxter and Jak 3 are nowhere near as difficult as this game. This game's difficulty really sticks out like a sore thumb when you compare it to all of the other Jak and Daxter games. Shoot, even most Naughty Dog games outside of like the original Crash Bandicoot and of course playing any of these games on the hardest difficulty, Jak 2 is very difficult. So if you're going to play Jak 2 for the very first time, just know that it's way more difficult than you'd probably expect.
Difficulty ever! I hate the difficulty! I hate the torture! I hate the pain and punishment!
So our next game is a game I've actually never talked about on the channel, and that is Overcooked 2. Now, if you don't know Overcooked 2, it's a fun little casual co-op cooking game where you all have to work together to make food. It goes up to 4 players cooperatively, and I'm pretty sure you can play this game alone, but I myself have never tried. Now, it seems like it would be just a fun little casual game you play at parties, and you don't really need to give it 100% of your attention. You know, you're having conversations, you might be eating some food at the same time. Well, Overcooked 2 is not that kind of game. While it seems casual on the surface and relatively low-key, I think anybody that's played this game for an extended period of time can tell you that this game actually gets decently challenging, especially if you want to try to get like most of the gold stars, or shoot, just even enough to beat the game. You're going to actually need to really coordinate and communicate with your teammates. Like, they expect you to make a lot of food in a quick amount of time, and if you're just kind of messing around or you don't really have a strategy, you really are just not going to be able to make the food fast enough. Sure, while you can get through the first few levels just kind of messing around and figuring out how to do everything in the game, once you get to, I'd say, the midpoint and then especially the later levels, some serious coordination is needed. Like, you will actually have to have strategies for every level. You're going to have to designate people to certain tasks. It's like you're working and you're a manager. Yeah, you get to be the manager of the McDonald's where you get to figure out what everyone's going to make. And then the levels are constantly keeping things challenging and interesting. Like, there's one level where the floor's moving around. Actually, there's several levels where the floor is basically moving around. There might be parts where you're separated. There's parts where they're constantly changing things up and you're going to have to react and think on the fly. The game is not a pushover and it's nowhere near as casual as it may appear. Again, on the surface, it looks like just a fun, casual little cooking game, but it's way more serious than that. And you know, maybe this game isn't as hard as I'm hyping it up to be. I just played with the wrong people, but actually I have a bachelor's degree in communication, so I understand communication. What I'm trying to say is this game will test your communication skills and your coordination skills as a team. It is a great game to play, but just know that it is not as simple walk in the park. And so here we have a favorite of mine. We have the original Dead Rising for the Xbox 360. Now, it is very much worth noting that Dead Rising is getting a quote deluxe remaster very soon, and I have a good feeling it's not going to be as difficult as this original game. But I gotta say, coming back to the original Dead Rising after such a long time, it was kinda surprising just how unforgiving this game can be. Like, I remember it was challenging and had some tricky time management, but actually playing the game again, I was just like, God damn, this game is ruthless. It is actually pretty punishing. And then the memories flooded back to me, and I remembered that I actually had to completely restart the game more than once because I just failed to properly manage my time. While this game might have plenty of goofy shit like picking up just about everything and killing zombies with it and taking pictures, this game actually gets very serious with its difficulty. The game takes its time management incredibly seriously, where the whole game really is running on a time limit and you have to do certain things by a certain time, otherwise you have to reload an earlier save or start the entire game over. It really is that punishing. There's no second chance when it comes to the time. You need to have objectives cleared and areas investigated by a certain time, otherwise the story just can't continue and you're basically wasting your time and you might as well start over. It is very, very possible to completely screw yourself over, and I have a feeling that a good portion of people did the first time they played this game. On top of that, the game actually does have some difficult moments. I mean, there's always going to be...
Oh no.
Yeah, there's these fucking assholes in the car that respawn every in-game day, I might add. Seriously, these guys are terrible. But they aren't the only difficult psycho. There are plenty of challenging boss fights thanks to the stiff controls, awkward feel, and the fact that you can't move and shoot in the original game. Yeah, I forgot about that one too. You actually can't move and shoot at the same time here. The game's save system is also decently punishing, and you can go upwards of like 2 or 3 hours without saving, and if you die, it's gone. But the new remaster is addressing this with autosaves, and honestly, that's good. The saving didn't need to be this ridiculous. And then when it comes to saving the survivors, man, this is a pain in the ass most of the time. I remember that they were a bit finicky and they weren't the sharpest tool in the shed, but no, the AI are fucking stupid in this game, like really stupid. They constantly get stuck on stuff and you have to babysit them the entire time. And getting as many of them back as possible, yeah, it's going to be a challenge, especially when those assholes show up. Now, despite all of this, Dead Rising is still an absolute classic. It is a video game-ass game, and there's really never been a series like it, but it's pretty easy to forget just how difficult that original game is. Dead Rising 2 has its moments, but Dead Rising 3 and 4 are relatively casual compared to this original game. It's a challenging game, but I absolutely love it to death, and I'm very excited for the deluxe remaster, and I think a little difficulty tweak would honestly be good for it. So the next game we're talking about is the original Bayonetta. Now, I've played plenty of difficult character action games, especially from like the 2000s and early 2010s. Devil May Cry 1 and 3 are very difficult, and the earlier God of War certainly do have their moments, but I did not expect Bayonetta to have so many challenging sections. Like, there are some parts to this game that genuinely really challenged me, much more than I thought, and I was just playing on the normal difficulty. As someone who's beaten all the Devil May Cries, I was just like, whoa, this game ain't holding back. It's actually got some tricky sections to it, and there were plenty of parts, plenty of levels where I actually died a few times. Could I have just spammed the healing items? Yeah, I guess I could have, but I was trying to not use a bunch of healing items, and I actually died a number of times. I'm not afraid to admit it. This game, it has some challenging moments. Some of the enemies can absolutely hit like a truck. They oftentimes don't drop healing items, and so unless you brought some with you, you just aren't going to be able to really heal. And if you use healing items, you actually get a lower rank. And so if you want to try to get the higher ranks in this game, yeah, you got to actually really master the game's mechanics. Maybe it was just a skill issue, but I thought there were plenty of enemies and some of the bosses in particular that really can just kick your shit in. Even if you're decent at the game, like, you're going to be dodging a lot of shit, and you're going to need half decent reflexes. And fair enough, that really does come with the territory of character action games, but this game, again, really tested me on certain levels, and I've played just about every game by Platinum. I've played Bayonetta 2 and 3, and I didn't think either of them were as hard as this first game. I didn't think Nier Automata was as hard, or Mad World, or Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, really just about all of their games. I didn't think any of them were as hard as the original Bayonetta. The game's still excellent though. It's one of the best character action games of the last like 15 years, and it totally is worth playing if you like the genre. Just know that this game, it's not going to be a cakewalk. It's not going to be super easy, and it's not going to be as easy as even the later Bayonetta games, but this game really does have an edge to it. Edge. Alright, we got another game from my childhood still haunting me, and that is Super Mario Sunshine. Now, when you think of Mario games, you probably aren't thinking of difficult or challenging video games. Outside of some difficult levels here and there and maybe the lost levels, Mario games don't really put up all that much of a challenge. And then we have Super Mario Sunshine. Over the years, Super Mario Sunshine has become pretty infamous for its difficulty, but I gotta say, it's still pretty surprising just how difficult this game can actually be. I mean, it's a 3D Mario game. How hard could it really be? Oh, it is crazy how this game is still not messing around all these years later. And what's even crazier is I'm not talking about getting every single shine sprite. I'm talking about just beating the game. Just beating this game at all is actually surprisingly difficult. If you want to go for every shine sprite, this is like the most difficult Mario game outside of the lost levels, but seriously, just trying to play through the game normally, do the bare minimum when it comes to collecting the shine sprites, there are plenty of shine sprites that you're going to have to retry over and over and over. What comes to mind immediately is the levels where you don't have FLUDD, where you have to do those platforming challenges. Mario is so slippery in this game, he slips off damn near everything it feels like, and all these years later, some of these are still incredibly difficult. Do not get me started started on the level where the chucksters have to throw you to the next area. I always really hated this when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, and as an adult. I played this game a few weeks ago and I went, man, this area is still fucking awful. Seriously though, sometimes Mario is just incredibly slippery in this game. And then there's just a bunch of other challenging shine sprites. I mean, some of them are optional, like the awful pachinko machine, but a lot of them are not, like we have to fight the giant manta ray, or you have to save the village on fire. There's just a bunch of challenging shine sprites in this game. And no, I'm not going to act like this is one of the hardest games of all time, but this is a mainstream Mario game. How many other Mario games have genuinely been this challenging? I mean, I guess there is like the older Mario parties with the cheating AI, but I kind of expect them to cheat. Mario Sunshine gave me so much trouble when I was younger, and it still gives me trouble to this day. I'm sure I'm not alone in this, and the chucksters, the fucksters, the chuckin' fucking whatever you want to call those guys, they still are awful. I hate them. So our next entry is a bit interesting. For the game, I have Superman 64, but I have just Superman 64 really representing a bigger issue here, and that issue is games that are so bad, that are just so fundamentally broken that they actually become challenging. And I don't think any game represents this more than Superman 64, where there's no way these games were made to be this challenging. It's that they're just so broken on such a core level that they become incredibly difficult, where broken mechanics or the controls being awful really ramp up the difficulty. Games like E.T. for the Atari 2600, where you keep falling in the hole thanks to the awful controls. Games like Wizard of Oz, where the hit detection is just atrocious and the collision is mad busted. And then Superman 64, flying through the rings gets difficult thanks to the poor controls and how sensitive Superman is. The poor instruction given to the player, getting lost and stuck in the walls, just really clipping through the environment and having to get back to the normal area. And then the fact that the margin for error is so slim in this game, like your time limits are incredibly strict, and I'm just like, there's no way it was supposed to be this hard, right? Like, these games are surprisingly difficult because it's clear, at least to me, you know, armchair developer over here, but I do have 7 AAA game credits, that these games were not supposed to be this difficult. They really weren't, and it's thanks to all these busted mechanics and awful controls that make the game just way harder than it has any right to be. I'm sure you could make an entire list of games that are broken and difficult, where they're difficult because they're so broken and bad. It's not challenging mechanics or difficult enemy patterns, or maybe you need really good reflexes. No, it's because the game is just broken on a fundamental level and it becomes more challenging thanks to that. I'm sure most people have played a game, or maybe a section of a game, that is way harder than it should be because, yeah, it's just bad mechanics. But again, the game I've chosen to represent all of these games is Superman 64 because, in my opinion, this one is the most surprising. Like, Superman, he's fucking Superman. How is anything difficult for him? Well, this game is. So the next game on our list is probably one most people wouldn't expect, and I have the original Kingdom Hearts. Now, you see Kingdom Hearts and you're like, oh, that's the fun little Disney game with the Final Fantasy characters. How hard could that really be? All I gotta say is, have you played Kingdom Hearts 1 recently? Maybe you did because the games just came to Steam, but I think all these years later, the original Kingdom Hearts is actually quite challenging. I'm not gonna act like it's one of the hardest RPGs I've ever played. This isn't SMT Nocturne or anything, but this game, yeah, it's harder than it appears. And I feel like a lot of this game's difficulty really comes from the fact that this game, pure and simple, has just aged throughout the years. And some parts of it really have not aged all that well. Take the combat, for instance. While it's not bad, it's quite clunky. They really improved the combat in Kingdom Hearts 2 and made it just a hell of a lot smoother, more intuitive, and really just refined all aspects. Here, at times it feels really awkward. It can feel imprecise and slow. Sora wields this thing kind of awkwardly and can feel incredibly sluggish. I think that's like the best way to describe the combat of Kingdom Hearts 1. It can feel very sluggish, and while that's not an issue against most enemies, some later enemies like the bosses can really whoop your ass in this game, and they can put up a decent fight and you're just like, hurry up, Sora, please move faster with your attack. Additionally, the platforming can get a little challenging in this game. Like, it just feels so clunky. It's so awkward. It's like a high schooler asking out someone on a date or the prom or something. I'm just like, make it stop, make it end. And some levels are way worse with the platforming than others, like Tarzan World. Fuck, am I watching High School Musical out here? Make it stop. It's so awkward. It's so clunky. And no, it's not the worst thing in the world, and it doesn't ruin the game or anything, but I think it makes it a bit more challenging. Also, it's not super obvious and clear what you're supposed to do in some of these levels. I remember when I first played Kingdom Hearts as a kid, I got to the Alice in Wonderland world and went, what do I do? And I explored around for what felt like hours. And even nowadays, I think it's a bit unclear where you're supposed to go or what exactly you're supposed to do. I'm not going to suggest yellow paint or anything like that, just maybe a reminder or something. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of people that'll be like, Kingdom Hearts 1 isn't hard at all. What on earth are you talking about? You just really suck at the game. And you know, fair point, you might have defeated me with facts and logic, but I'm still going to stick to my emotions, and I feel that this game is actually more difficult than you'd expect. I guess kind of like Toy Story, you wouldn't expect the Disney game to be this difficult. I don't think Kingdom Hearts 1 is as hard as Toy Story, but it certainly has its moment. And so here's a game you probably didn't expect to show up, and that is Diddy Kong Racing. I'll be the first to admit that yeah, maybe there is some egg on my face, and I should have expected this game to be more difficult. I mean, the Donkey Kong Country series is stupidly difficult, and Rare has made a lot of very challenging games like Jet Force Gemini, Battletoads, Perfect Dark, etc., but this is Diddy Kong Racing. This is a cute, friendly, cuddly kart racer about Diddy Kong and his friends racing each other and then going up against some mystical pig thingy. I don't know, whatever the fuck WizPig is, failed abortion, whatever you want to call it. It's nothing too out there. You wouldn't expect this to be a challenging game really at all, you know? Oh, maybe the AI is a little rubber bandy, but that's all you'd expect at most. Diddy Kong Racing is maybe the most challenging racing game on the 64 outside of F-Zero X, but you see, you expect F-Zero to be difficult. You don't expect Diddy Kong Racing to be difficult, and it's very inconsistent with its difficulty. In the adventure mode, you do plenty of races, and the races are relatively easy. Most of them won't give you any trouble at all. It's when you gotta collect the silver coins that the game gets way harder, where they start hiding them all over the map, and you gotta look for them all and still come in first place. This is challenging. The boss fights are also very challenging. I remember spending a lot of time on these boss fights. The first one, it ain't that bad, but all of the other ones, oh yeah, they're difficult, especially WizPig, man. That failed abortion, he is way harder than you would expect. The first and second time you race him, he kicked my ass plenty of times. And then the time trials, yeah, I've just never been able to actually beat these. These are incredibly difficult. You need just absolute mastery of these controls and tracks. And the game certainly challenged me way more than Mario Kart 64 ever did. I mean, sometimes the AI are real pieces of crap in that game, but Diddy Kong Racing, it's a challenging enough racing game. It's still fantastic, and it's one of my favorite games of all time, but there were certainly moments where I was pulling my hair out. I mean, nowadays I'm not going to do that since I have a bit of a receding hairline. So our next game is not a game that has haunted me for many, many years. It's a modern game. It's Returnal. Now, I have talked about this game plenty of times in the last 6 months alone. I very much enjoy Returnal. I think it's a great game and one of the best games for the PS5, but I gotta say, I was decently surprised with the game's difficulty. I mean, I heard it was challenging, and yes, I know pretty much every roguelike is difficult to some extent just because of the random nature of roguelikes, but I genuinely was surprised with how challenging this game actually got, especially because it was by SIE. That is, it was published by Sony. Now, Sony doesn't really put out games that aren't for everybody. As someone who literally worked there, I can tell you the games they put out are meant to be as accessible to as many players as possible. Returnal is absolutely not that. There are plenty of people that have played this game and went, I don't like it. I don't like the structure. I don't like how hard it is. I don't like how it has a pretty steep learning curve. And the point I'm trying to make is, yeah, it really isn't made for everybody. And so that's why I was surprised that the developers really stuck to their guns and made a challenging, fast-paced, roguelike third-person shooter. The game is very fast-paced. It takes quite a bit of time to really get used to. And at times the game can be very unforgiving, where you can lose like an hour of progress. The game can be incredibly relentless as well, where you need to give it your full complete attention for upwards of an hour or two at a time. The runs can last very long, and the random generation can really mess with everything. You can have just a total shit run because you get awful drops, no good weapons, don't get any proficiency, nothing. But you can also have really great drops. And I've heard plenty of people go, oh, this game isn't that hard. I just got good drops and then it became pretty easy. Well, no shit, the game's gonna be easy if you get god tier drops. But I didn't get god tier drops. I got like okay stuff for the most part, and then I just got good. It had a decent learning curve. But I feel like once you understand all of the game's mechanics and it really clicks, then the game doesn't become as challenging. But I still found the game overall surprisingly difficult because it's a first-party Sony game that actually has some bite. let me rephrase that a little, a modern Sony game that is actually difficult. Can't say that about any other modern Sony game. But I also think the game is still fantastic and totally worth playing. Such a good game. So for this entry, we got a double feature. I have Super Monkey Ball 1 and 2 for the Nintendo GameCube. Now, like many other games on this list, these games have kind of haunted me since I was a child. I got the second game as a gift when I was under 10, and I was like, oh look, a game about like monkeys and they're in a ball and you got to get to the end of the obstacle course. This'll be fun. Well, fast forward even an hour or two later, and I could not beat these stages to save my life, and I actually didn't like the game. I didn't like how hard it was. I didn't think it was fun. I mean, I was a little kid. What do you expect? And I remember just being absolutely gobsmacked as a kid with how difficult this game gets. And you know, looking back, I can't really blame my kid self. It's a game about cute monkeys in a ball getting to the end of the course. How hard could it really be? Really difficult, actually. As a kid, I got rid of the game. I just didn't think it was any fun. I got it later as a teenager, and Super Monkey Ball 2 ended up becoming one of my favorite games of all time. And then I checked out the first game, expecting it to be hard, and oh, it wasn't just hard, man. This game is really hard. Both Super Monkey Balls are some of the hardest games I've ever played, and are some of the most challenging games for the Nintendo GameCube. They're great. They're some of my favorite games of all time, but yeah, it's still kind of surprising just how difficult these games are. And they've been remade now with Banana Mania, but I don't think Banana Mania is as difficult as the original game, and I feel like it's kind of neutered, especially when you compare it to the original game thanks to the just kind of questionable physics. The original two games are still super difficult with very brutal, punishing physics and level design. Seriously, some of these levels are just sadistic. Like, they're very difficult. Like in the second one where you have to launch the ball up and then land on the goal, otherwise you just die. I have always hated this level. I always lose at least 1 or 2 lives whenever I play through this game. This level sucks. The first game has plenty of challenging levels as well, especially on the hard mode. Like, just about every level is hard, and this isn't like other games where you play through the game and there's easy, normal, and hard. In Monkey Ball, there's easy, normal, hard levels, and you play through these levels. And the hard levels, well, I'll just say they're not lying when they say they're hard. These are really freaking hard, and you're going to be on them a long time. And it doesn't matter if it's like 2004, 2008, 2012, 2020, 2024, 2028, this game's always going to be hard, and it's always going to be just a little surprising. How could a game about monkeys be so difficult, man? And so the next game we have is Rayman 1. Now, I love the Rayman series. There's really not a bad game in this series. Rayman 1's great, 2 is excellent, 3 is almost as good, Origins is great, and Legends is fantastic. This series really is just gold, and they're all pretty consistent with their difficulty. Outside of Rayman 1, while I would say the rest of the series is not really all that challenging, Rayman 1 is absolutely the exception here. This game is way harder than you would expect. It looks like your cute, friendly 2D platformer from the 90s, but what you have here is actually a pretty difficult platformer. At times it can be even rather relentless. But why is it so difficult? I would say that there are 2 key reasons as to why the game is so difficult: the level design and the enemy placement. The controls are great, Rayman has a good moveset, and the game absolutely takes advantage of it, but the level design can get really tricky, especially towards the end of the game. There are plenty of times where things get hairy like a freaking ape or a gorilla or something out here. Like, the level design gets genuinely challenging, and then the enemy placement, well, this is what really makes the game difficult. The enemy placement is all over the place in this game. Literally, it's basically random where the enemies place down, and so, yeah, there's some trial and error here, and you can know the level's design, but you're never really going to know where the enemies are going to show up, and oftentimes they show up in really just the most inopportune areas, where it's just like, come on, dude, that's like the worst area. You could be literally anywhere else on screen, and it would have been better than where you are, but yeah, they showed up right there and you end up getting killed or getting hurt, and it all adds up. Yeah, it's a difficult game, and the enemy placement alone is the reason why I died so many times. And then you also have to break every cage in all of the levels to get to the final level. That's a real thing in this game. They make you go full completionist mode outside of the charity fraud, and you have to save everyone. You will not be able to beat the game at all unless you save everyone. Usually I don't include, like completionist difficulty onto my list, but if you want to see that last level, you're going to be saving everybody, and it's a real pain in the ass. You're going to be replaying these levels over and over, looking for everything, and then you won't even truly know the levels because of the random enemy placement. Like, this is legit one of the hardest PS1 games of them all. It's one of the hardest 2D platformers of the 90s. And there was a lot of challenging games then, and it's just kind of shocking it's a Rayman game. I mean, Rayman 2 is not only barely anything like this, but it is way, way easier to not only beat, but 100%. Really, I could say the same about the whole franchise. It's very consistent with its difficulty, but Rayman 1, man, Rayman 1 is going to kick you in the balls, then when you fall over, they're going to curb stomp you too. It's a very challenging game, and all these years later, it is incredibly surprising just how absolutely ruthless this game can be. It's ruthless aggression, I tell ya. Okay, don't worry, it's not all old games here. We do have a modern game. We have Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Now, maybe this one shouldn't be so surprising that it's difficult, considering it is kind of like a Souls-like, but at the end of the day, this is still a mainstream Star Wars game. Most of the time when a Star Wars game has come out in the last 10-15 years, it's been very accessible, especially when it comes to the difficulty, but Jedi Fallen Order is actually decently challenging, and I would say it's more challenging than the sequel Jedi Survivor, at least it was for me. Yes, the game is basically a Souls-like, and it comes with all the difficulty that a Souls-like has, where you have to go get your souls back after you die, the somewhat slower methodical combat, and the fact that the enemies can be rather punishing, and that of course adds some difficulty. But I think where this game has its most difficult moments is with the boss fights. There was a few boss fights in this game that I really did struggle with, where I died a fair amount of times, way more than I expected. Again, I expected a little challenge from this game, but I didn't expect to die as many times as I did. Maybe I just wasn't utilizing the mechanics to the fullest, or there's the very good chance that it is just a skill issue, but I found some of these boss fights actually genuinely challenging, and then fighting some of these bigger creatures like the big frog thing, like they whooped my ass plenty of times. They kicked my ass to Sunday and it was freaking Wednesday. Man, what the fuck am I even saying anymore? I'm just saying a bunch of random shit, but what I'm trying to say is that this is a challenging game. I know I'm not alone when I say that this game was harder than what I expected it to be, at least. The level design is decently challenging, there's a ton of platforming, but I didn't find that all that challenging. It really was some of the fights that just kicked my ass over and over, where you need good reflexes, you need to understand enemy patterns, and you need to be able to anticipate what the enemy or the boss is going to do next and then counter appropriately. And yeah, what I described is basically bosses for every Souls-like, but again, I'm just kind of surprised because it is a Star Wars game. How many Star Wars games are difficult outside of Super Star Wars? Like, actually. Okay, there is Shadows of the Empire on 64, and Rogue Squadron has its moments, but generally, Star Wars games aren't all that challenging. They're relatively consistent. Jedi Fallen Order is easily the hardest Star Wars game in like the last 20 years, seriously. And again, I didn't find Jedi Survivor anywhere near as challenging as Fallen Order. Maybe it was because I knew what to expect, but I just didn't find it as hard of a time. Regardless, I still think the game is excellent, and if you haven't played it and like Star Wars, I really don't know what you're waiting for. Just be prepared for a somewhat challenging time. So Monkey Ball wasn't the only doubleheader. Here we have Need for Speed Underground 1 and 2. Now, I thoroughly enjoy the Need for Speed franchise. I've actually ranked the entire series. It's like an hour-and-a-half long video, and a lot of people seem to disagree with me about it. But one thing I can confidently say about the series after playing every game is that it is all over the place when it comes to the difficulty. Some of them are not challenging at all, and sometimes it wants to really test me and my patience. The game that tested me the most though was definitely Need for Speed Underground. Like, I was genuinely surprised with just how difficult this game can get, and when I moved on to the second game I was like, oh, it can't be as hard as the first one. No, it really does get just about as difficult as the first one, and I just went, really? Seriously? And I'd say both of them are difficult really for the same two reasons, the just straight up cheating AI and the traffic. Now, Need for Speed and cheating AI or really excessive rubber banding just kinda go together like peanut butter and jelly, and me and my spicy Wendy's nuggets. I mean, every Need for Speed game has rubber banding issues, but most of the time it's pretty manageable. Not in Underground 1 and 2. The AI will constantly catch up to you. Like, it straight up does not matter how far you get ahead of them, they will find a way to catch you. They move at speeds that are basically impossible. Like, they really will be riding your ass the entire race. You'll never win a race by more than a few seconds at most, and at the end of both of these games, it just gets absolutely ridiculous, where literally one mistake in the last like 30 seconds will just blow the entire race. And some of these aren't, you know, 3, maybe 4-minute races. Some of these races, especially at the end of the first game, get just ridiculous, where they're like 6, 7, 8, 9 minutes, and if you mess up in the last 10 to 20 seconds, it's over. You got to redo the whole thing. I remember in the first Underground, mission 95, I believe it was, it's like right at the end of the game. I probably spent over an hour on this stupid mission because I would mess up at the very end or in the last lap, and it's over. And it's like a 9-minute race. And then the traffic is just ridiculous in both games, where the traffic literally just spawns around you, where the traffic like purposely spawns in the most annoying, worst spot imaginable, and you'll hit it, you'll slow down, you'll crash, the race is over, you gotta restart. Call it a skill issue. I'm saying that the traffic is purposely placed horribly, and it's just super annoying. And it's like, yeah, I didn't expect the game to be easy. I expected a bit of rubber banding. I did not expect to spend as long as I did trying to beat Underground 1 and 2. These games are probably way harder than you remember them. Maybe you remember them actually being that difficult, but as someone who didn't grow up with these games and I played them only as an adult, I was pretty surprised with just how tough these games got. They're awesome games and they have fantastic soundtracks, but they're challenging as all hell. And so for today's last game, we have Winnie the Pooh Home Run Derby. Now, normally I don't ever talk about games like this. This is a browser-based game, a Japanese-only browser-based game, I might add, but I just had to make an exception with this game. This game is way too infamous to not be mentioned on a list like this. This game might be the most infamous, surprisingly difficult game of them all. I mean, it's a Winnie the Pooh baseball game. How hard could this game really be? Oh, it's real hard, actually. I thought it was a joke for years, but then when I actually finally sat down and tried it, I just went, what the fuck? This game is way harder than it should be. It's a little kid's baseball game. Why is this brutally difficult? All you gotta do is hit the ball. It's as basic as it gets. Hit ball with stick, but then, they really make it incredibly difficult to hit the ball with said stick. It's easier to literally hit a baseball in real life than some of the pitches thrown to you in this game. It starts out simple enough, it's not even that challenging, you know, you hit some balls, you see some fun Winnie the Pooh characters, then frickin' Christopher Robin shows up and it's all over. He throws the craziest balls and you need to hit a majority of them. You need to hit like 80% of the balls to progress, and they just throw the absolute craziest pitches on planet Earth. Forget Wii Sports, forget Mario Baseball, forget MLB The Show, forget Super Sluggers, all of them. None of them compare to the crazy pitches of Winnie the Pooh and his home run derby. Like, seriously, this is just ridiculous. This game went viral and is a meme, and it is for a reason. The game should not be this difficult at all. It's surprising that, yeah, it's just not actually beatable for a majority of people. I mean, there's no way a kid could do this, let alone most adults. You really need to be patient. You gotta just keep trying over and over, and I have a feeling most people would get bored. Don't ever try this game. It really is a waste of time because of how difficult it is, and it's just shocking. There's been a few Disney games that have popped up today, but this is truly the most surprisingly difficult game of them all. This is like the most surprisingly difficult game of the entire list. I had to have this one last, and this is how we're ending the video. Let me know down below what some surprisingly difficult games are for you. I'd love to know. If you made it to this part of the video, you can put in the code word, which tells me that you made it to the end of the video. You will get a heart from me. Thank you very much. That code word is Christmas. I'm going to repeat that. It's Christmas. And yeah, that's it for the video. So hope you all enjoyed. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. See you all later. Bye-bye now.
You know what? The video is not actually over. I got one last game for you that everybody seems to hate on that's truly overhated. Twilight Seen It on Wii. This game is way too overhated, super ignored, underrated, hidden gem, whatever you want to call it. Twilight Seen It, man. It's true.